took the car keys off the hook by the front door, the hook I installed 31 years ago, and told me the driveway wasn't mine to park in anymore. That was a Tuesday, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I stood there with a casserole dish in my hands. Sweet potato, her favorite since she was 4 years old. And my daughter looked at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered up from the street. Dad, this really isn't a good time. I looked past her shoulder. The house was full of people. A mother-in-law was arranging flowers on the dining table I'd paid for. Her husband's college friends were laughing in the living room, on the sectional couch I'd bought them as a housewarming gift. Someone had a football game on the television mounted to the wall I'd helped hang. Whose time is it then? I asked. She didn't answer. She just stepped back and let the door close. I stood on that porch for a moment longer than I should have. Long enough to feel ridiculous. Long enough to hear the laughter inside get louder. Then I walked back to my truck, set the casserole on the passenger seat, and drove 40 minutes home to an empty house. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I'm 64 years old and I've been through enough to know the difference between a wound and an insult. This was both, but I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table with a can of soup and thought about the first time I held her. How small she was. How certain I was in that moment that there was nothing I wouldn't do for her. I thought about that for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. My name is not important. What I am is a father, a grandfather of two. A retired structural engineer who spent 38 years building things that were meant to last. Bridges, overpasses, a few municipal buildings you've probably driven past without noticing. I'm good at understanding load-bearing structures. What holds weight, what gives way, what looks solid from the outside but is quietly failing underneath. I should have applied that knowledge to my own family sooner. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is. Even now, even after everything, married a man named Vincent 6 years ago. I tried to like Vincent. I genuinely did. He was charming in the way that men who'd never been told no tend to be charming. Smooth, a little too certain of himself, always the funniest person in the room, according to himself. He had an MBA and a firm handshake and very little patience for people who didn't immediately recognize how exceptional he was. My daughter had always been sharp, funny. She could read a room the way I could read a blueprint. I watched that quality fade in her over the years of their marriage, the way paint fades on a south-facing wall. Gradually, then all at once. Vincent didn't like me. I understood that early. What I didn't understand was how thoroughly he'd worked on her. When they got married, they were renting an apartment in Charlotte. Nice enough place, but tight. They wanted to buy a house. Vincent had some credit issues from a venture that hadn't gone well. I never got the full story, and after a while I stopped asking, and my daughter's salary as a school administrator wasn't quite enough to qualify for what they wanted on her own. So I stepped in. I co-signed the mortgage, contributed $40,000 toward the down payment. And because I wanted them to have a real start, I agreed to cover the mortgage payment, $2,200 a month, for the first 2 years while they got on their feet. 2 years became 3. 3 became 5. I didn't complain. It was my daughter. You don't keep score with your own child. What I didn't fully account for was Vincent keeping score. The first sign was small. A Christmas 2 years into the marriage, I'd driven up to spend a few days. I arrived to find that Vincent's parents were already there, installed in the guest room, clearly having been invited for the full week. There was no room for me. My daughter suggested I get a hotel nearby. It'll be easier, she said, in a tone that told me the suggestion hadn't originated with her. I got the hotel. I told myself it was fine. The next sign was a birthday dinner, my daughter's 34th, where Vincent spent the meal talking about a business idea he wanted me to invest in. When I declined, the dinner got quiet. The drive home was the last time I remember her hugging me in the driveway. After that, my visits got shorter, then less frequent, then mostly phone calls, then mostly tungst, then texts that came later and later in response to mine until sometimes they didn't come at all. I kept paying the mortgage. I want you to understand something. I'm not telling the story to make myself sound like a martyr. I made choices. I kept writing those checks because some part of me believed that as long as I was contributing, I still had a place. That the connection was still there, just stretched thin. That if I stopped, I'd be proving I'd given up on her. What I didn't understand was that Vincent had already decided I was an obstacle, and my daughter had started to see me through his eyes. The week before Thanksgiving, she called me. I was in the garage, working on a birdhouse I'd been building for my granddaughter, my son's daughter, who lives in Raleigh and calls me every Sunday without fail. The call from my daughter caught me off guard. We hadn't spoken in almost 3 weeks. Dad, she said, about Thanksgiving. I was thinking I'd come up Wednesday evening, I said. I'll bring the sweet potato casserole, the one you always. That's actually what I'm calling about. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear something in the background, dishes maybe, or the television. Vincent's family is coming this year. All of them. His parents, his brother, his sister, and her kids. It's going to be a full house. I don't take up much room, I said. She laughed a little. But it wasn't the real laugh. It was the one she developed in the last few years. The one that smoothed things over without resolving them. It's just we're really trying to make it special for his side this year. And you know how his mom can be. She gets overwhelmed with too many people. I counted the ceiling panels in my garage. I do that when I need a second. There are 16. His mom, I said, has met me exactly 4 times, Dad, and I'm the one who pays for the house they'll be eating in. She was quiet again. She was quiet again. Longer this time. That's not fair, she said. We never asked you to do that. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I had the cancer checks going back 5 years, because I had the wire transfer receipts, because I remembered sitting at my own kitchen table, writing the routing number into my online banking, month after month, telling myself this was what fathers do. You're right, I said. You didn't ask. I offered. But I want you to think carefully about what you just said. Dad, please don't make this difficult. I'm not making anything. I'm being told I'm not welcome at my daughter's Thanksgiving table. I just want to make sure we're both clear on what's happening. She said she'd call me later. She didn't. I drove up anyway. I know how that sounds, but I want to be honest about it. I drove up because I still didn't believe it. I'd raised her. I'd sat with her through every hard thing in her life. I was in the waiting room when she had her appendix out. I drove through a snowstorm to help her move apartments in 2014. I was the first person she called when she found out she'd gotten the administrator job. I drove up because some part of me needed to look her in the eye and know for certain. I parked a half block down the street. The driveway was full. 2 cars I didn't recognize and Vincent's SUV. Through the front window I could see lights, movement, the warmth of a full house. I sat there for a few minutes. Then I drove to a gas station, bought a coffee, and called my son. My son is younger than my daughter by 4 years. He's a steadier person, quieter, more careful with his words. He listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Dad, he said, are you still paying their mortgage? Yes? Then you need to stop. I already knew that. But hearing someone else say it made it real in a different way. The legal situation, I said. I co-signed. I can't just. I know, he said. That's why you need to talk to Dennis. Dennis is my attorney. We've known each other for 22 years. He handled my divorce, my father's estate, a contract dispute I had with a city contractor in 2019. He's one of the few people I trust completely. I called him the next morning. Walk me through the structure, Dennis said. He said that a lot. Walk me through the structure. It was why we got along. I explained the cosign, the down payment which I had documented as a gift at the time, which I now wished I'd structured differently. The monthly payments, all of them, wire transfers from my personal account, 62 months of records. The gift is complicated, Dennis said, but the monthly payments, those you can stop at any time. You're not legally obligated to continue voluntary contributions. And the cosign? That's trickier. But stopping the payments doesn't trigger default immediately. They'd have to miss payments themselves for that to happen. What you're stopping is your voluntary subsidy. What about the down payment? There was a pause. You documented it as a gift. At the time, yes. My accountant suggested it for tax purposes. Then legally, that's theirs. But here's the thing, Lawrence. That's my name. Lawrence. People who know me call me Larry. My daughter used to call me Dad in a way that made it sound like a compliment. You have been making 62 months of voluntary mortgage payments on a property you co-signed. That establishes a pattern of financial support that a court would take seriously if this ever became a legal matter. You have standing here that most people in your position don't have. I'm not saying sue your daughter. I'm saying you have options. I don't want to sue her, I said. I don't want to sue her, I said. So let's talk about what you do want. What I wanted was simple, and it had nothing to do with money. I wanted my daughter back, the real one. The one who used to call me when she had a hard day, not because she needed anything, just to hear my voice. The one who saved her Halloween candy to bring some home for me because she knew I liked the peanut butter cups. The one who cried at my father's funeral and held my hand through the whole service, even though she was only 19. That person was still in there somewhere. I had to believe that. But I also understood, and this was the hardest thing I've ever had to accept about my own child, that until the situation changed, she didn't have the conditions to come back. She was inside a structure that had been built around her, and she didn't even see the walls. So I decided to change the structure. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I called my bank. I set a stop on the automatic wire transfer that had been going out on the 15th of every month for 5 years and 2 months. $2,200. Gone from my account, gone from their budget as of the following cycle. I did not call my daughter first. I know some people would say I should have, but I had already called her. I had already been told, gently and firmly, that I was not welcome. I had already driven 40 minutes home with a sweet potato casserole on my passenger seat. I had already given her every opportunity to see what was happening. Some structures only reveal their flaws under load. I let the load drop. She called me on the 19th. I remember because it was a Tuesday, and I was at my woodworking class. I take one every Tuesday evening at the community center. Been doing it for 3 years, and my phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called again on the 20th. I was making dinner. I let that one go too. On the 21st, she called from a different number. I picked up. Dad. Her voice was different. Not the smooth, managed version I'd gotten used to. This was something raw. Dad, there's a problem with the mortgage. I know, I said. Silence. What do you mean, you know? I mean, I'm aware that the automatic payment I've been making for the last 5 years will no longer be going out. More silence. I could hear her breathing. You can't just. I can, I said. It was always a voluntary contribution. Dennis helped me review the paperwork. You talked to a lawyer about this? I talked to Dennis about most of my financial decisions. He's thorough. Dad, we can't. The mortgage is $2,200. We don't have. She stopped herself. I heard something shift in the background. A door closing. You don't have what? I asked. Vincent's job. She stopped again. It's been a hard year. This was the first I was hearing about any of it. And I am her father. I'm the person who should have been the first call when things got hard, not the last. Tell me, I said, and she did. Haltingly, with long pauses, she told me. Vincent had been passed over for a promotion twice. He'd been managing his frustration in ways that were, in her words, not great. The business idea he'd pitched to various people, including me, had not materialized. His parents, the ones whose comfort at Thanksgiving had been more important than my presence, had loaned them money last spring that they were already asking to be paid back. She was exhausted. I could hear it in her voice. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I asked. Because Vincent. She started and stopped. Because it's complicated. Did he tell you not to call me? Longer silence this time. Long enough that I had my answer. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. It was the longest we'd talked in 3 years. By the end of it, she was crying, not in the managed, social way people cry when they want to end a conversation, but the real kind, the kind she used to do when she was 12, and the world felt too big and she'd come sit on the floor of my workshop just to be near me. I didn't tell her I'd forgiven everything. I didn't promise the payments would resume. I told her I loved her. I told her that had never changed, not for a single day. Even when I was parked half a block from her house watching the lights in her window. She asked me if I knew about that. I told her yes. She cried harder. Dennis and I had a follow-up call the week after. I told him about the conversation with my daughter. He listened. Then he said, "What do you want to do from here?" I'd been thinking about that. The mortgage situation needs to change, I said. I'll resume payments. But not as a gift. Not as a voluntary contribution. I want a formal agreement. A legal document that acknowledges my role as a financial stakeholder in that property. A promissory note, Dennis said, or a deed of partial interest, whichever gives me standing, whichever makes clear that the financial relationship is real and mutual, not one-sided. That will require them to sign. I know. You think Vincent will agree? I think my daughter will understand why it's necessary. And I think once she explains it to him in terms of what happens if they don't, he'll agree. Dennis drafted the document. It took 3 weeks of back and forth. Vincent hired his own attorney. I didn't begrudge him that. And there were some changes to language. But in the end, they signed. The first payment under the new agreement went out on February 15th, documented, acknowledged, a real transaction between adults with clear terms. Vincent and I are not close. I don't expect that to change. Some things that get bent don't return to their original shape, and I've stopped pretending otherwise. But my daughter called me on a Sunday in March without a reason, just to talk. She told me about a book she was reading. She asked about my woodworking class. She mentioned that my granddaughter, her niece, my son's daughter, had sent her a drawing in the mail and she'd put it on the refrigerator. We talked for 40 minutes. When she said goodbye, she called me dad the way she used to, like it was a compliment. I'm telling the story because I think a lot of us know this feeling. That slow realization that someone you love has drifted inside a situation that doesn't have room for you. That specific loneliness of sitting in a parking lot outside a lit window, holding coffee that's gone cold, wondering how you got to be on the outside. You didn't do anything wrong by loving them. You didn't do anything wrong by helping. But love without structure is just weight without support. Eventually something gives. I know structures. I spent 38 years making sure the things I built could hold what they were supposed to hold. It took me longer than it should have to apply that to the people I love most, but I got there. And the door, my daughter's door, the one I watched close in my face on a Tuesday afternoon in November, is open now. I brought sweet potato casserole at Christmas. She ate 2 helpings. That's enough. For now, that's more than enough. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not just the events, but the mechanics underneath them. The way things built up so slowly that I almost didn't notice until I was standing on a porch holding a casserole dish, watching a door close in my face. Here's what I've come to understand. The situation didn't happen because my daughter was a bad person. It happened because good people, under the wrong kind of pressure, inside the wrong kind of structure, can make choices that would horrify the earlier selves. Vincent didn't turn her cruel. He just built a world where my presence was inconvenient. And then he made that world feel normal to her, one small adjustment at a time. That's how these things work. Not with a single dramatic moment, with 100 small ones. And my role in it? I kept funding the structure. Every month, $2,200, I made it easier for that world to exist. I told myself I was being a good father. I was. But I was also making it easy for everyone to avoid the harder conversation. The one where somebody had to say out loud that what was happening wasn't right. When I finally stopped the payments, I wasn't punishing her. I want to be clear about that. I was removing the thing that let the problem stay comfortable. Discomfort, I've learned, is the only honest catalyst. People don't examine a structure that's holding. They only look at it when something shifts. The promissory note Dennis drafted wasn't about money either. It was about reality. It said, this relationship is real. It has weight. It has terms. And both sides have to acknowledge that. The years of pretending it was all a gift, that I didn't exist in any formal sense in their financial life, that was the fiction that made it easy to treat me like I didn't exist at all. What I keep coming back to is this. The people who take the most from us are rarely malicious. More often, they're just allowed to. And we allow it because we love them, and because we confuse love with acceptance of every condition love finds itself in. That's not wisdom. That's fear dressed up as generosity. The wisest thing I did wasn't stopping the payment. It was staying on the phone with her for an hour and 40 minutes on a November night, listening to everything she should have told me months ago. That took more out of me than any check I ever wrote, because it meant holding space for her truth and my hurt at the same time, without letting either one win. She's still figuring out who she is outside of the life Vincent built around her. That's going to take time. I'm not rushing it. What I know is that the door is open. And I know that because I didn't burn anything down. I just stopped pretending the foundation was solid when I could see the cracks. I spent 38 years building things that hold. I should have known you can't support a structure indefinitely from the outside. At some point, it has to stand on its own.